Loading. All right. So, welcome to Module 1 of our play-based professional development here. Our first module is called What is Play? This module, I'm just going to go over what play-based learning is. So, play-based learning refers to a set of learner-centered strategies in which students can learn through the context of play. That's a pretty basic definition, but essentially it is utilizing play or playful situation or playful tools to bring about natural learning through the students. So these strategies are historically based. Early childhood schooling in America utilized a lot of play and is moving away from that currently because of the high rigor in the standards. But they are still very valid strategies and can actually help to achieve the rigor of those standards. Play-based strategies are also developmentally appropriate. One of the biggest supporters of play-based learning was Lev Vygotsky. He was a Russian psychologist, and you will learn more about him shortly, because these strategies speak to the development of young children. Okay. They also promote experiential learning, application of learning, and motivation to learn and creativity. And that is a quote from one of the studies that I read that was recently done here in 2020. And one thing I wanted to point out that particular study was a study done in Turkey, I believe. And when I was looking into research studies about play-based learning and its effectiveness, many of the studies, not articles, not blog posts, the actual research studies about the effectiveness were done in countries abroad. So there was a lot of studies in Russia, several in Australia. There was one in Turkey. There was one in Greece. I don't think I found, there was a couple in Canada, but I don't think I found a single one in the US recently. And that's not to say that they don't exist. It was just in the university library in my resources. Things that I found were not US based. So that was just kind of an interesting little tidbit that I wanted to share, that these are strategies that work, but in the US, they haven't really been investigated as much in my research. So the historical basis, in the 1800s, in Europe and America, there started to be a push for early childhood learning. That means kids younger than the ages of 7 and 8 started going to school. Now, the reason for this is actually because they wanted to develop a working class among those younger children. But aside from that, the first kindergarten classes were based off of the theories of Pestalozzi and Froebel. They were both early childhood educators who developed kindergarten back in the 1800s. So they were educators and philosophers. So within these classes, there was an emphasis on play because it was believed that play was what led to inner awareness and understanding. So that education was developed through play. Now here I also have it listed that it was referred to in the United States as the German model, because kindergarten was modeled off of those two educators, those two theorists. From Europe, it was referred to as the German model. And this is actually where the split from play-based learning to more academic rigor started, was that Americans wanted more skills to support their children working, to get their children into the job force, into the job market. And so rather than teaching them through play, they wanted them to learn those skills. So that's kind of where that split happened. But that was where originally play was based, or early childhood education was based on play. So here is Mr. Lev Vygotsky. He was a renowned developmental psychologist from Russia. He actually died very young. But before his death, he worked very hard to understand human development, and he believed that play was a process which supports, encourages, and actually drives child development. It was his belief that that was what drove development, not necessarily was just a supporting factor. So that is kind of a huge statement to come from a renowned psychologist. So one of the quotes that I have here is that in play, the most important thing is not the satisfaction of the child receives through playing, but the objective use and the objective meaning of the play, of which the child himself is unaware. This meaning, as is well known, involves the development and exercise of all the child's powers and latent strengths. So basically what he is saying is while the child is playing and enjoys it and receives satisfaction from it, it's actually what they use and the meaning that they get out of the play that drives the development. It helps them to develop their powers and their strengths through how they play. So Vygotsky play, the way that he referred to it, he specifically referred to what he called real play. Now, real play sounds like playing with real objects or creating real situations, but the way that he described it was that it included 3 important pieces. The child or children's creation of imaginary situations. So they're not necessarily actually being what they think they're being. It doesn't mean that you take a child to the grocery store and let them play in the grocery store. It means that they create themselves an imaginary situation in which they play a role. That's the second thing. They create, accept, and act out roles. So, for example, I mentioned the grocery store. Children maybe want to play grocery store. So they would create roles which match a grocery store situation. Maybe somebody chooses to be a grocery clerk. Maybe somebody chooses to be a shopper. Maybe somebody wants to be putting vegetables on a shelf. So they're creating those roles based on their understanding. And then finally, they follow rules dependent on those roles. So the children choose those roles, and then they have to stick to them. A grocery cashier would take money. A grocery cashier would probably not be trying to drink milk. A grocery cashier would probably not be playing baseball during this play situation. So it is a situation where they create an imaginary situation. Usually, my understanding is that their imaginary situations are based on real life because that's what kids know. But it can also be a fantasy. So, for example, if they've read a lot of books about unicorns, their imaginary situation may be riding a unicorn, and one kid chooses to be the unicorn. So there's not a rule on what the situation must be. It's just that it's imaginary. They have roles, and they stick to those roles and the rules that apply to those roles. All right, so here's one of those books that I showed you. This is Play. Stuart Brown is a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, a clinical researcher, and he is the founder of the National Institute for Play. So he knows what he's talking about. Dr. Brown, while he did believe that there's no absolute definition of play, he did outline 7 properties of play. And in the book, he specifically says, there is no definition, and I wrote these properties because I've been asked to outline it. So just keep that in mind, that play is a unique thing. It is something that comes inherent with children. So even psychiatrists and psychologists, it's hard to put labels on some things. So, anyways, even with that understanding, Dr. Brown created these 7 properties. The first is that play is apparently purposeless. That sounds very negative, but I will get into that in the next slide what each of these means. 2, play is voluntary. 3, play has an inherent attraction. I think we all know that's true. 4, play provides freedom from time. We'll get into that a little bit more, but essentially the idea that kids lose track of time when they're playing. It's like, what is that common saying? It goes fast when you're having fun. I'm saying that wrong. Number 5, in play, we experience diminished consciousness of self. Number 6, play has improvisational potential. And number 7, play provides a continuation desire. You do not want to stop playing. You are enjoying it. So here's a little bit more about these properties of play. The apparent purposelessness. That doesn't mean that there is no purpose to play. It means that it exists for its own sake. It is not there to serve a purpose. Kids do not play to achieve something like making money or creating a necessary item. They play to play. They play because it's what they want to do. So purposelessness does not mean that it doesn't have value. It just means that children do it without having a goal. And adults do as well. Voluntary play is voluntary. That's not something that we are required to do. It is not something that in a classroom you can say, hey, you're supposed to be playing right now. It's typically something children and people choose to do. You choose to do things that you enjoy. So that's one thing to consider when you're considering play-based strategies, that play is not meant to be a requirement. It is meant to be something that they want to do. The inherent attraction, play is fun. It cures boredom. We want to play. Similar to number 2, we don't have to force play. Play is meant to be a fun thing that kids want to do. It comes with the territory. Number 4, I talked about a little bit. When we engage in play, we lose track of time. Play allows us to kind of step out of ourselves, which is actually number 5, but it helps. We get so engaged in it that we forget what else is going on. So 4 and 5 kind of go together. Diminished consciousness of self. When we engage in play, we stop worrying. In imaginative play, we pretend to be somebody else. We become a different self. So when you're playing, I don't know if you've ever noticed playing with a child, they take on the roles that they have. They think that they are what they say they are. When my daughter pretends to be her daycare teacher, she wants to be called her teacher's name, and she acts like her teacher. She takes on that role completely. So we become that different self. Number 6, improvisational potential. In play, we are not locked into rigid ways. Aside from games with rules, there's not a whole lot of rules that say you can and cannot do something. If I want to pretend to be a rainbow unicorn elephant, I can do that because there's no rule saying that I can't play. I can't pretend to be that imaginary animal. So it's open to new ideas and insights. We stumble onto learning that way. So, for example, my little girl wanted to play cooking, and she really wanted to put something in the oven. She put it right in, and then she just randomly remembered that ovens are hot and had to find her own solution for keeping her hand from getting hot. Basically, that she was playing, and then learned that she needed to use a hot pad for that. And some of that's from observation. It's not my best example ever, but the idea is that your play situation can morph and adapt, and you aren't stuck to a rigid set of rules. And finally, continuation desire. Play is engaging, and we desire to continue. I don't know if you've ever told your students that we have to stop something in 5 minutes and every single one of them groans. Or your own children. It's time to go. They groan. Because it's fun. They want to continue. The pleasure of the experience is what drives the desire to continue. They are having a good time. They want to continue doing it. So shouldn't that be something we want for learning as well? And that's what makes play-based learning so powerful, is that if it encompasses these properties, the kids are going to be motivated and want to be part of it. Okay. So now that we kind of have a basis for what play is, from a few psychologists, here are the types of play. And this comes from that book that I have recommended over and over, Purposeful Play. And the authors of this book have highlighted the 4 types of play as fantasy and imaginative play, constructive play, games with rules, we know those ones, and rough and tumble play. We are going to get into rough and tumble play a little bit, but when you see that, don't cringe or think it's not important, because it is. So these are the 4 types of play. There are other resources who may label them differently, but these are really nicely laid out. So we're going to go into them a little bit more in depth. Fantasy play. Now I'm seeing now that in presenting mode, these colors are a little bit harder to read, so I'll go ahead and go into them a little bit more. Fantasy play is an imaginary scenario in which children take on and act out roles and develop rules from those roles. This is very, very similar to Vygotsky's real play, like almost identical. So a few examples from the book, and I'm sure you've seen. Playing restaurant. Children play customers. They may play a waiter. They may play a cook. And they're going to use objects to represent the pots, pans, tables, and food. Now, when I asked for donations for my first grade classroom, I was able to get a kitchen. You may not have a kitchen. So kids can use their imagination to represent those pots, pans, tables, and food. You don't have to have those toys. So just throwing that out there. Again, the grocery store example, they may play cashier, shopper, announcer, and they're going to act out those roles. Several other play situations you may see. A lot of them, like I said before, can be based off of real life examples, things that kids observe. They're probably going to want to play mommy and daddy, or a family situation. They probably will want to do something like restaurant or grocery store or police officer or fireman, or jobs that they've seen. They may want to do something more fantastical like a unicorn or a princess. But those are all examples. These situations help them develop their abstract thinking because they are using objects in substitution for those that they need. And in these situations, objects can have multiple meanings. My pencil might be my spoon for stirring my pot, and it may also be my fork, and it may also be a straw for a drink. My pencil might even then turn into a wand because I want to be a wizard now. But the same object can have multiple meanings, which helps them to develop abstract thinking. So that's a brief overview of what fantasy play looks like. Constructive play. Constructive play we see a lot of, specifically using an art station. It is an organized form of play in which children use materials to create something. So this activity becomes more complex with age. Some examples could be constructing with Legos and blocks. So if you think about complexity, my 3-year-old isn't going to build a very complex building, but my 12-year-old nephew creates some of the most amazing things I've ever seen. out of Legos. They may create signs, construction paper cards. This is also where storytelling and dramatic reenactment fall, because they can create costumes, settings with blocks and paper. They're creating stories, and they're acting things out. Now, this particular type of play can help teach problem solving. It can help develop deeper understanding, and you can apply your learning. I just read a story about three bears. I'm going to go act it out. That helps me apply that story. And it is especially relevant to math, science, and engineering, especially if you consider the constructing with items. So, constructive play. Next is games with rules. We know these ones. I have a cupboard full of games. So these are games with rules that have already been set by an external source. That means the children did not create the rules. They did not create these situations. In order for children to play or for the game to work, they must comply with the set of rules. So for example, hide and seek. If the seeker doesn't cover his eyes, it doesn't really work. If hiders don't find a spot where they're hidden, it's not a very hard game. The game doesn't work if they don't do their job. Okay, so that's an example. Another example is organized sports. There are rules. You can't pick up a soccer ball with your hands. The game doesn't work that way. So these help develop cooperation skills, the formation of strategy, healthy competition, which we will get into more in the next module, but also developing empathy. So thinking about winning and losing, and children knowing what those things feel like. And finally, we have rough and tumble play. This is physical play, which usually involves body contact between two or more children. Now, I want you to think about this. It is considered, play fighting or horse play. When I see that in my classroom, I typically shut it down. And you'll see over on the left-hand side of this slide, it says, examples are sword fights, wrestling, and chase and tag. Now, this kind of play generates controversy. That's why I shut it down. It might get taken too far, and it can lead to injury. Unfortunately, though, this is the type of play that children crave. Now, before I get into some benefits, I am not sitting here telling you to allow rough and tumble play. We have rules about these things. There's a reason why we're hesitant to allow them in school. I'm just presenting to you the fact that they are beneficial and that they are something that children want to participate in. So one of the developmental benefits of rough and tumble play is that it helps learn give and take. You can't push someone a bunch without them pushing you back. That's, again, controversial. I don't want my kids to be pushing each other, but that is something they learn. They learn what it means to go too far. It's a big thing for boundaries, and learning when you need to stop. It helps them learn subtle social cues. If my friend is making a really angry face at me, I should probably stop what I'm doing. It helps them learn self-restraint, very similar to the social cues, learning when to hold back. And it helps them learn to manage their emotions. If you go too far, you learn to maybe hold that in a little bit more next time. So again, rough and tumble play actually has a lot of benefits. It has a lot that can come out of it. I'm not saying you need to allow it. It's just something that you should be aware of, that it is a beneficial thing. All right. Purposeful play, Mraz, Porcelli, and Tyler also go into the 6 stages of play. And these are stages that children go through, starting with unoccupied behavior. Onlooker behavior is next. Solitary play, parallel play, associative play, and then finally cooperative play. So these stages a little more outlined. Unoccupied behavior is the most immature form of play, and it's where the child is observing randomly and engages in fidgeting or repetitive behavior. Basically, they're not doing much. They may look over at their neighbors. They may kind of look and see what you're doing, but for the most part, they're just kind of filling their time. Onlooker behavior. This is where the child becomes more deliberate. They observe what the other children are doing. They may approach the other children. They may ask questions, but they're not playing yet. This is somebody who's feeling timid. This might be a kiddo at their first day of school or their first day of daycare, or just a younger child watching older children and thinking, what are they doing? So that's onlooker behavior. Solitary play. This is where the child chooses to play, but alone. They might be near another group, but they're doing their own thing. So the child has decided they want to play, but they're not participating with the group yet. Parallel play is the next level, the next stage. The child chooses the same materials as another child or children, but they don't communicate, or they only communicate about their own play, not the other child's. So if two children are playing with Play-Doh, this is a great example. Maybe one child decides to make an elephant, maybe one child decides to make a rhino, or something completely different like a whale. And one child may say, hey, look at my elephant. But they don't ask about the other child's whale. They don't suggest that they make things. They're just absorbed in their own play, doing the same thing, though. Associative play is a little closer to playing together. They play together in a group. They use the same materials. They're doing the same activity, but they're not exactly working together. So similar to the Play-Doh, I want to play with you with Play-Doh. Cool, let's both grab blue. Hey, I'm going to make a rhino. Cool, I'm going to make a rhino too, but they're each working on their own rhino. And they're not occupying roles. It's not, hey, you make the head, I'll make the body. It's not, hey, we're playing grocery, you're the checker, I'm the shopper. In a grocery store situation, maybe they both want to play grocery, but they're not playing together. One's not selling items to the other. They're just both in the same station. And using the same materials. Cooperative play is the last stage. This is the most mature form of play. Children plan what they're going to do. They discuss, they negotiate. I'm sure you've heard that. No, I want to do that part, but it's my turn. And they assign roles. You get to be the clerk today. Tomorrow I'll be the clerk. Then they play together. So they're going to work together to build the elephant out of Play-Doh, or they're going to work together in the grocery store. One's the checker, one's the shopper. You take my money, I get to take the food home. So those are the stages of play. And finally, this goes kind of along with that, is the critical elements of play. There's the elements that need to be involved in play. This is from researchers Deborah Leong and Elena Bodrova. I think earlier I said Leanne Bodrova. It's Elena Bodrova. Sorry about that. They developed a list of these critical elements of play. They can be used with the acronym PROPELS. I don't know if you see that O is a little bit smaller because that's part of the word roles. So the intent of identifying these critical elements is to allow you to assess your children in how they play. Do they plan? Do they use roles? Are they using props? Do they play for an extended time frame, or is their play short? What kind of language are they using, and are they acting out scenarios? So the definitions are there. The children's ability to think about play in advance is their planning. Roles we've talked about. It's the actions, language, and emotional expressions that are associated with a specific role. They are involved. Props, the objects that they use. The extended time frame means that play lasts for a long stretch of time. Language, when they say, it's what they say to develop the scenario, to coordinate the actions of the different players, and the speech associated with that role. So if I'm a mom, I'm going to talk maybe lovingly, call you sweetie. If I'm pretending to be a baseball coach, I may not talk the same. And then the scenario is what the children are acting out. So I'm not going to read this whole chart. This is a graphic which outlines propels, those critical elements of play, and also the stages of play. Now, I think I mentioned that the different types of play may be referred to in different ways. Same with the stages. First, scripts, role and action, roles with rules, mature roles and planned scenarios, and symbolic props. I'm looking up here. And then there's dramatization and multiple themes, multiple roles. A little bit different than the stages as explained by Tyler Poselli and Mraz, but they're also stages. So this graphic helps to assess. Are they using planning? Okay. Are they doing it just by planning the roles and naming the actions? Or is it very elaborate? Hey, are they using roles? Are they elaborate roles? Do they have social relationships? Are they using props? So where does your student fall on this list is a way to assess. It can also be utilized to scaffold play. Like, hey, I see that they're coming up with elaborate themes. They're spending more time planning than actually acting. But, they're not creating an actual scenario. They're doing a lot of planning and there's just a lot of ideas. So they might fall here. So you can use this to scaffold maybe the creation of scenarios. And that is something that we'll talk about more in the next module. But the question it says down here is, what elements or stages need to be introduced to help the child engage in more mature play? So that is a tool. That was a lot of information. I feel like I talked at you for a very long time. So let's go ahead and apply it. You've been presented with multiple explanations of types of play, elements of play, and stages of play. And it says using this Google document, if you open up your slides yourself, this link will take you to the Google document, and I will go there next. Describe the types, elements, or stages of play you've observed or expect to observe in your early childhood classroom. Now, I know things are different because we are in the time of COVID. So think back on other experiences or your understanding through your education of what you might see. Do as many as you like or as few as 5. Use explicit examples if possible. When you finish, you can either email it to me. It's not graded. It's not shared with anyone. It's just me checking to see if you understand the information that I've presented and just applying that. So it's just an activity to apply what you've learned through this video. Here are my resources. There are quite a few. If you open up the slide, you can possibly touch some of the links. Some of the things have come from the university, so you may not have access, but if you reach out to me, I can probably get you access or a copy. So those are the resources. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and show you this link now. If you open up the slides, you can click here and it should take you straight into the Google Classroom, which has the Module 1 application of learning. If you don't want to go into the slides, you can also just find it in Google Classroom. Click on it, it will make a copy for you, and here's what it looks like. Name, grade level, and school is totally up to you. You don't even have to put that. It can be, you don't have to. I put a few examples of what you might see. And then I've only numbered 1 through 5. That's you only have to give me 5 if you'd like, but you can tell me as many or as few as you want. So just what play have you observed or do you expect to observe in your instructional setting? I want to thank you for being part of Module 1 and look forward to hearing from you.